The fluorescent light above the bed had been flickering for 6 hours. Nurse Priya Okafor had logged the maintenance request twice. The facility's supervisor had not responded to either. The light flickered on, steady, then off in a long pulse that made the shadows in room 114 go strange and deep before the tube caught itself again. In that brief darkness, the woman in the bed stopped moving. Priya checked the monitors, checked her breathing, and wrote the time in the margin of her notes. 3:47 in the morning. The woman's name was Dorothy Aldrich. She was 79 years old. She had been at Pine Grove Care and Rehabilitation for 11 days, transferred from the county hospital after a second stroke left her right side slow and her speech arriving in pieces, like a puzzle the brain kept trying to reassemble. Her emergency contact was listed as a granddaughter in Boise, Idaho. The granddaughter had called once on the day of admission and had not called again. The space for next of kin after that was blank. Nobody had come to sit with her. Nobody, that is, until the man arrived with the dog. Gideon Marsh pulled his truck into the Pine Grove lot at noon on a Tuesday in March, and he sat there for a long moment before he cut the engine. The truck was a 12-year-old Ford, dark green under a season's worth of road grime, and it had driven a long way from the Idaho border. Gideon was 41 years old, 6'2", broad through the chest and shoulders, in the way of a man who had never stopped carrying heavy things. His hair was cut close on the sides and a little longer on top, dark brown going silver at the temples, and he had not shaved in 4 or 5 days. His face was weathered in the particular way of men who had spent years in environments that did not care whether they were comfortable. A vertical scar ran along his left cheekbone, pale and thin, from a piece of shrapnel that had grazed him outside Fallujah in 2005. His eyes were the color of creek water in autumn, green-gray and still, and they moved in the slow, methodical way of a man who had trained himself never to stop observing. On the passenger seat beside him, Coda sat with his ears forward and his dark eyes watching the facility entrance. Coda was a German shepherd, 7 years old, working line and compact but solid, somewhere near 85 pounds. His coat was a sable pattern, the guard hairs dark brown shading to black along the back and shoulders. The undercoat a warm buff gold at his chest and legs. His ears were large and fully erect, and he had a faint white patch, barely an inch wide, at the base of his throat where the fur grew in a different direction. Like a small compass, rose pointing north. He wore a plain black collar and a short leather lead clipped to the door handle. But he was not restrained by instinct. He stayed because he chose to stay. "We're not going to find anything," Gideon said. Not to the dog specifically, just out loud. Coda turned and looked at him. Gideon got out of the truck. "If this kind of story stays with you, consider subscribing. There are more stories like this one, and you will not want to miss where they go." The reason Gideon Marsh had driven 230 miles from the Idaho border to a care facility outside Clearwater, Montana, was a phone call he had received 9 days earlier from a man named Russell Dent, who had been his platoon sergeant in the Marines and who now ran a small veterans legal assistance network out of Spokane. Russell had been trying to locate family members of a woman named Dorothy Aldrich, whose maiden name was Dorothy Marsh, and whose youngest brother had been Gideon's father. Dorothy was Gideon's great-aunt. He had met her exactly once, at a family reunion in 1996 when he was 11 years old. He remembered a tall woman with silver hair and a voice that carried across a room without effort, and he remembered that she had given him a butterscotch candy from her coat pocket and told him he had his grandfather's eyes. That was the full sum of what he knew about her. His father had not spoken of her much. His father had not spoken of many things. Russell had told him there was reason to believe Dorothy's situation at Pine Grove was not straightforward, and Russell was a man who chose his words with the precision of someone who had once been responsible for 14 lives in a forward operating base. Gideon had asked what he meant. Russell had told him to go see for himself, and to bring whatever documents he could get his hands on, and to pay attention to who else showed up while he was there. Gideon had brought Coda because he brought Coda everywhere. The dog had been his since 2019. Retired from service after a compressed nerve in his left front leg, had ended his working years at 6. A handler at the Boise facility had called Gideon because Gideon had worked with Coda for 2 years before his own discharge, and because the handler said Coda had been refusing food for 3 days. Gideon had driven up and taken him home that same afternoon. Coda's leg had healed mostly, enough for walking long distances and for the stairs in the apartment where Gideon lived between jobs. He ran a little stiffly in cold weather. He did not seem to mind. The lobby of Pine Grove Care and Rehabilitation smelled of industrial cleaner and something faintly institutional beneath it, a smell Gideon associated with hospitals and processing centers, and the kind of bureaucratic machinery that moved slowly and without particular concern for the people caught inside it. A woman at the front desk looked up when he came through the door. She registered Coda with a slight hesitation. "He's with me," Gideon said. "Emotional support documentation, if you need it." The woman shook her head once and typed something. He signed the visitor log, and she directed him to the East Wing. Dorothy was asleep when he came in. She looked smaller than he expected, which was something he had learned to stop being surprised by in any setting where the institutional machinery had been running for a while. Her hair was still silver, cut short now, and her right hand rested on the blanket in the loosely curled position of a hand that could not yet hold a grip. The room was clean, but impersonal. There was one photograph on the bedside table, a boy of about 8 in a blue jacket smiling at a camera somewhere outside. No cards, no plants. The water pitcher had been filled recently, which was something. Coda crossed to the bed slowly without being told, and sat beside it. His ears were forward. He made no sound. Gideon pulled the chair from the corner and set it on the other side, and he sat down. And he looked at his great-aunt's face. He was trying to find his grandfather there, because Russell had said Dorothy was the one who looked most like the old man. He thought he could see it, maybe in the shape of the jaw. She woke about 20 minutes later, by degrees, the way people wake when sleep is something they do not entirely want to leave. Her eyes opened and found the ceiling, then found Gideon, and he watched her try to sort out who he was. "I'm not a doctor," he said. Her mouth worked for a moment. "I know," she said. The words came carefully, each one placed like a foot on uncertain ground. "I can tell. My name is Gideon. I'm Ray Marsh's son." She looked at him for a long time. He did not rush it. "Raymond," she said finally. "He passed 4 years ago." Something moved across her face. "I know," she said. "I heard." The dog made a small sound then, just a soft exhale, and Dorothy's eyes went to him for the first time. Coda was watching her with his head slightly tilted, the white compass patch at his throat catching the light. "What is his name?" she asked. "Coda." She reached her left hand, the good one, slowly over the edge of the blanket. Coda leaned his head forward and let her touch his ear. He stayed very still. "My grandson," Dorothy said. She paused, reassembling. "He wears that same patch. The Marines." She was looking at Gideon's left arm, at the eagle, globe, and anchor embroidered on his jacket sleeve. "Same one. On his shoulder." Gideon did not move. "What's his name?" "Owen," she said. Owen Aldrich. He's 24. She said it with the careful pride of someone who has been holding a name like a stone in their palm, something real to carry when everything else had gone uncertain. Gideon noted the name. He noted what she did not say, which was that Owen had been here, or was coming, or had called. He noted the single photograph on the table, which was of a child and not a young man. "Tell me about him," he said. Dorothy talked for nearly 40 minutes in the slow, assembled way her speech allowed her, and Gideon listened to all of it. Owen had enlisted at 18, same as Gideon had, out of a town called Mineral Creek, 40 miles east of Clearwater. He had done a deployment to Kuwait and was currently stationed somewhere, she thought Camp Pendleton. Though she was not entirely certain, he called her every 2 weeks, or he had been, until about 4 months ago when the calls had stopped. She had tried to write to the base. She had not received a response. Her daughter, Owen's mother, had passed 3 years prior. Owen was the last direct family she had. "Nobody told him I was here," she said. It was not a question. "Who would have told him?" Gideon asked. She looked toward the window. "Mr. Ferris handles my affairs." The name landed quietly in the room. "Who is Mr. Ferris?" Gideon asked. "He helped me with the house," she said. "After the stroke, the first one, he said it was too much for me alone." She paused. "He said he would handle things. The paperwork. The move." She said the word move with a particular flatness, like a door closing on a room she was not allowed back into. Gideon wrote the name in the small notebook he kept in his breast pocket. He did not write it large. He had learned that there was a kind of motion that did not require speed. He spent 3 hours with Dorothy that first afternoon. He got her water. He read to her from a Field and Stream magazine that was the only reading material in the room, choosing the fishing articles over the hunting ones on instinct. And she listened, with her eyes half closed, and the trace of something that was not quite a smile at the corner of her mouth. Coda spent most of that time with his chin resting on the edge of the bed, not demanding attention, simply present. At one point, Dorothy laid her left hand on the dog's head and left it there for a long while without speaking. When the 4 o'clock medication cart came through, a young aide named Marcus stopped at the door and blinked at the dog. "He's certified," Gideon said. Marcus looked at his clipboard. "We don't have any paperwork for a therapy animal in this room." "I'll get it taken care of." Marcus looked at Dorothy. She was looking at the dog with the settled expression of someone who has decided, for the first time in a while, not to be afraid. Marcus looked back at his clipboard, turned a page, and moved on down the hall. Gideon found a motel 2 miles from Pine Grove called the Clearwater Inn that accepted dogs if you signed an extra form and put a credit card on hold. He signed the form and put the card on hold. Coda sat beside the bed that night, and Gideon lay on top of the covers in his clothes and looked at the ceiling and thought about a man named Ferris. He called Russell Dent at 8 the following morning. "Leland Ferris," Russell said, before Gideon had finished spelling the name. "Self-described estate management specialist. He runs a company called Aldine Property Solutions out of Kalispell. I've been looking at him for 6 weeks." "What does Aldine Property Solutions do?" "Mostly it identifies elderly homeowners who've had a health event, gets them to sign over property management authority, collects fees for services it doesn't always render, and in at least 3 cases has assisted in the quiet sale of the property to a buyer who is also a client of Ferris personally." Gideon said nothing for a moment. Outside, a semi pulled out of the parking lot of the gas station across the street, its diesel engine loud in the cold morning air. He watched it go. Dorothy owned a house, he said. She did. 2-bedroom on the east end of Clearwater, paid off, assessed at about $212,000. She's been a Pine Grove resident for 11 days. The house listed on a private real estate site 6 days ago. What name is on the listing? Aldine Property Solutions, acting as authorized management agent. Gideon stood up from the chair. Coda rose at the same moment, watching him. Has she signed anything? Gideon asked. That's what I need you to find out, Russell said. She needs to be able to tell you. Or you need to find someone who saw it happen. In person, not on a phone call. Who would have witnessed it? Ferris brought a notary for at least 2 of the other property signings. The notary's name is Deb Cantor. She's licensed in Flathead County. I don't know if she was at Pine Grove. Gideon wrote the name. He thought about Dorothy's right hand, the one that lay loose on the blanket with its grip uncertain. He thought about 11 days and a listing posted 6 days ago. Is there a lawyer who can move on this if I get what you need? He asked. There is a lawyer, Russell said. Her name is Irene McPhail. She does elder law out of Missoula. She's already got Ferris on her radar. What she needs is a witness or a document with an irregularity. Give me a few days, Gideon said. He went back to Pine Grove that morning, and he spent an hour with Dorothy. And then he asked her, carefully and without hurry, whether she could remember signing anything after she arrived. Dorothy said she had signed papers. Yes, she thought so. But the stroke had made some of those early days blurry, and she had trusted Mr. Ferris to explain things. She said that a woman with red glasses had been there, someone she did not know, and that Mr. Ferris had guided her left hand because her right hand was still not working well. She said she had not understood everything but Mr. Ferris had said it was just temporary management authorization. Did he say anything about the house being sold? Gideon asked. No, Dorothy said. She said it simply, the way she said most things, with the plainness of someone who had not yet fully processed how much weight that single word was going to have to carry. Gideon asked Marcus, the aide, that afternoon whether he had been on shift during Dorothy's first 2 days. Marcus said he had been. Gideon asked whether he had been present in the room when Dorothy had signed any documents. Marcus looked at him with the careful expression of someone who was calculating what he was allowed to say. I was in the hallway, Marcus said. I saw the man come in. Suit. Nice shoes. I saw a woman with him. Red glasses, Gideon said. Marcus looked at him for another moment. Yeah, he said. Red frames. Would you be willing to say that to a lawyer? Is Mrs. Aldrich okay? Marcus asked. She will be, Gideon said, if people do the right thing. Marcus looked down the hallway in the direction the medication cart had gone. He was maybe 22, with careful hands and the expression of a person who had been told more than once that it was not his place. I get off at 6, he said, not looking at Gideon. I could call somebody at 6. There was a coffee shop 4 blocks from Pine Grove called the Meadow Fork Bakery, run by a woman named Arlene Thibodeau, who had been in Clearwater for 30 years and who baked her own bread every morning before 5. Gideon discovered it on his second day when he needed somewhere to sit that was not the motel room, and he discovered Arlene on the day she brought a piece of coffee cake to the table without him asking, and told him it was because she could tell he needed it. She was 63, short and wide-shouldered, with gray-streaked hair she kept in a practical braid and reading glasses pushed up on her head. She had a way of appearing at the edge of whatever Gideon was doing and making her presence felt without demanding anything in return. On his 3rd day in Clearwater, he told her why he was there, which was not something he had planned, But Arlene was a woman who made things come out of people without seeming to try. She listened through the whole of it with her elbows on the counter and her reading glasses still on her head. "Leland Ferris," she said when he finished. Her voice had a particular flatness to it. "He sold the Ollendorf property last year. Everybody in town thought it was strange. Old Mr. Ollendorf had been at the Pine Grove East Wing for about 3 months, same as your aunt." "Where is Mr. Ollendorf now?" Gideon asked. "He passed in January," Arlene said. "His daughter in Portland is still trying to figure out what happened to the property." Coda, who had been lying under the table, lifted his head and looked toward the front window. Gideon followed the dog's attention without turning it into a gesture. A dark blue Cadillac had pulled up to the curb across the street. It sat there with the engine running. Gideon did not look at it directly. He watched Arlene instead. "Does Ferris know most of the people at Pine Grove?" he asked. "He's in there all the time," Arlene said. "Brings the director flowers at Christmas." The Cadillac idled for 2 minutes, then pulled out and drove east on the main road. Coda watched it go, then laid his head back down. "His grandmother used to come in here," Arlene said. "The Ollendorf boy's grandmother. She used to get a blueberry scone on Saturdays." She straightened up and wiped down the counter. "I'd like to help, if there's something I can do." "Not yet," Gideon said, "but soon." Russell called that evening with the name of the real estate buyer. It was a Kalispell-based company called Clearwater Holdings, and its sole registered agent was Ferris. Gideon sat with that for a while. Then he called Irene MacPhail in Missoula. Irene was 55, brisk and direct in the way of a person who had been doing necessary work in an under-resourced field for 20 years and had learned not to spend energy on things that did not move the needle. "I need 2 things," she told him. "A credible witness to the signing, and evidence that Dorothy's cognition at the time of signing was impaired enough to void informed consent. Does her medical record show a stroke in the week before the documents were executed?" "She was transferred 11 days ago," Gideon said. "The documents were signed within the first 2 days. The medical intake record would show her condition." "Medical intake records are not public," Irene said. "I need Dorothy to authorize the release." "She can do that." "Then get me that authorization form signed by her tomorrow and get me the witness statement from the aide. And if you can get me anything in writing about Ferris's relationship to Clearwater Holdings, that's the 3rd leg of the table." "Is 3 legs enough?" "3 legs," Irene said. "We'll keep the house from being sold to himself for the next 90 days while we file for emergency guardianship and contested agency dissolution. After that, yes, it's enough." Gideon drove back to the Clearwater Inn in the dark with Coda on the passenger seat. The mountains to the east were invisible in the cloud cover, but he knew they were there. He had gotten used to that in his years of moving through places, the knowledge that things were present even when you could not see them. He sat in the parking lot for a few minutes before going in. He had been in 3 different states in the past 18 months. He had done roof repair in Nevada, fence work along the Oregon coast, 2 months helping a cattle operation outside Bozeman, before the weather pushed him back to the road. He was not sure what he was looking for when he moved. He had told himself it was nothing, that some people simply needed the motion of forward, the way a certain kind of river stays clear by moving and goes stagnant the moment it stops. He had mostly believed it. He called his mother that night, which surprised her, because he did not call often enough, and they both knew it. "There's an aunt," he told her. "Dad's aunt. She's in a care facility in Montana." "Dorothy," his mother said without hesitation. "Your father talked about her sometimes. He felt bad about losing touch." "Did he know she had a grandson? A Marine?" His mother was quiet for a moment. I think there was a grandchild, a boy. I don't know much about him. Owen Aldrich, 24. Camp Pendleton, maybe? Can you find him? Russell's working on it, Gideon said. The next day, he brought the medical release form to Pine Grove and sat with Dorothy while she read it. Or rather, while she listened to him read it to her, and then while she signed it with her left hand in slow, careful letters. Marcus witnessed the signature. Marcus also wrote out a statement in his own careful block printing about the man in the suit and the woman with the red glasses, and the date and what he had seen. Gideon photographed both documents with his phone and sent them to Irene within the hour. Ferris arrived at Pine Grove that same afternoon. Gideon was in the hallway outside room 114 when the man came through the lobby. He knew it was Ferris before the man spoke because of the way he moved, unhurried and proprietary, as if he had some particular claim on the floor beneath his feet. He was about 50, maybe 52, well built in the way of a man who paid someone to keep him that way, with a gray overcoat that was expensive without being loud, and a face that had learned to arrange itself into something that looked like warmth. He saw Gideon outside the room, and he registered the dog, and his eyes did what practiced eyes do, which is take everything in without appearing to. "Visiting Dorothy?" Ferris said pleasantly. "Staying with her," Gideon said. Coda had not moved from his position beside Gideon's left leg. His ears were fully forward, and he was looking at Ferris with the sustained, precise attention he reserved for things that required watching. "She's lucky to have a visitor," Ferris said. "Family?" "Yes." Something adjusted in Ferris's expression. Not dramatically, just a small recalibration, like a man resetting a balance. "I handle her property affairs," he said. "I don't believe she mentioned any family to me." "That's interesting," Gideon said pleasantly. Ferris looked at him for another moment, then he looked at Coda. And Coda looked back at him with the kind of stillness that was not calm, but rather the stillness that comes before a decision. "I'll stop by another time," Ferris said. "That's your right," Gideon said. Ferris left. Gideon went back into the room and sat in the chair beside Dorothy's bed. She had been awake and had heard the voice in the hallway. "That was him," she said. "I know." "What happens now?" she asked. "A lawyer in Missoula files some papers," he said. "And then some other things happen. And then Mr. Ferris has a difficult few months." He said it without heat. Dorothy looked at him for a long moment with the expression of someone who is deciding whether to believe that the world occasionally works the way it is supposed to. "You sound like your grandfather," she said. Gideon looked at his hands. He did not say anything. Arlene Thibodeau made calls that evening. Gideon had not asked her to, but she was a woman who understood that certain situations required the particular kind of action that did not wait for an invitation. By the next morning, 3 other people had come forward to Russell's network. A retired county assessor named Harold Priest had documented 2 property transfers that traced back to Aldine Property Solutions within the past 14 months. A woman named Beverly Gaines, whose mother had been a Pine Grove resident 2 years prior, had a stack of papers she had been trying to find someone to look at for 8 months. And the daughter of Mr. Ohlendorf in Portland had a lawyer of her own who had already been corresponding with Irene's office, and who called Gideon directly to say that she had been trying to find someone on the ground in Clearwater for 6 months and was prepared to support whatever action was being mounted. Russell submitted a formal complaint to the Montana Department of Justice Consumer Protection Division on day 5. Irene filed for emergency guardianship on day 6. She also filed a notice of contested agency with the State Real Estate Commission, citing the conflict of interest in Ferris, acting as both management agent and buyer through Clearwater Holdings. The house did not sell. On day 7, Gideon found Owen. It was Russell who actually located him. through a contact at a veterans advocacy organization with connections to Camp Pendleton's Family Support Services. Owen had not stopped the calls intentionally. He had transferred to a new unit, and the paperwork for his contact information update had not been processed correctly, and Dorothy's letters had gone to a mailbox that was no longer his. When Russell reached him through a different channel and explained what was happening, Owen had asked for 12 minutes to sort out emergency leave and then called back to confirm the dates. Gideon told Dorothy that evening. She had been sitting up in bed when he came in, which was new, and Coda had walked directly to her and placed his head in her lap and left it there, which was something he did rarely and which meant something, though Gideon could not have said precisely what in language. Dorothy's left hand rested on the dog's ear. She looked better than she had on the first day. Something had come back into her eyes, some specific quality of attention. "He's coming," she said. "He'll be here on Friday." She was quiet for a moment. The afternoon light came through the window at a low winter angle, warm and thin, and it caught the edge of the water pitcher on the bedside table and threw a small arc of refracted light across the wall. Dorothy watched it. "I thought he had forgotten," she said. "He didn't know," Gideon said. "There's a difference." She looked at him then with a precision that surprised him, a clarity that the weeks of illness and the slow reassembly of her speech had not touched. "You've been moving around," she said. "Haven't you?" It was not quite a question. "For a while," he said. "Your grandfather did that," she said. "After the war. 3 years. He just moved." She paused. Then he stopped. "What made him stop?" Dorothy looked at the window. "He found somewhere that needed him to," she said. The physical therapist came in then, and Gideon stepped out into the hallway and stood with Coda by the window at the end of the corridor. He looked out at the parking lot and the strip of mountains visible above the roofline of the building across the street, still carrying snow on their upper reaches, catching the late afternoon light in a way that was almost too much to look at directly. He did not call anyone. He just stood there for a while. Arlene called the Clearwater Chronicle on day 8, and a reporter named Vince Partridge, who had been covering local real estate for 6 years, and who had noticed the Ohlendorf property transfer the previous year with a suspicion he had not been able to prove, drove out to Pine Grove and sat in the lobby with Gideon for 45 minutes. Gideon did not give him anything documented. He gave him names. Harold Priest, Beverly Gaines, Irene, Russell. He gave him the name Clearwater Holdings. He told him to talk to the Portland lawyer. He told him to look at the Flathead County notary records for a woman named Deb Cantor. Vince Partridge drove away, looking at his phone. On day 9, Irene called to say the emergency guardianship petition had been granted, temporarily, pending a full hearing. The house could not be transferred. Ferris had 48 hours to produce all documentation related to the management agreement. "What happens to him?" Gideon asked. "That depends on what the documents show," Irene said. If Dorothy's signature was obtained when her medical record shows impaired cognition, and if the notarization was irregular, Ferris is looking at a contested consent case and potentially a fraud referral to the AG's office. The real estate commission complaint runs separately. "And Dorothy?" "She keeps her house," Irene said. "And we put real guardianship in place for her affairs. Someone who is actually accountable to her." Gideon thought about what accountable meant in practice. He thought about what it required of a person. Owen arrived on Friday at 2 in the afternoon. He was 24 years old, 5 feet 10, lean and very straight in the posture of someone who had learned to carry themselves as a statement. His hair was cropped military short, brown, and his face had the particular unfinished quality of young men who have been through serious things before their features have fully settled into what they will eventually be. He wore civilian clothes, jeans, and a canvas jacket, and on the left shoulder of the jacket was the eagle, globe, and anchor. Not the same one as Gideon's. The same patch, though. He stopped in the doorway of room 114 and looked at his grandmother, and she looked back at him, and neither of them said anything for a long moment. Coda, who had been lying by the window, stood up and walked to the door and sat down in front of Owen and looked at him carefully. Owen looked at the dog, then reached out slowly and let Coda smell his hand. Coda pressed his nose against Owen's knuckles and held it there. Gideon was in the corner chair, and he stood up to leave. Dorothy caught his eye. "Stay," she said. He sat back down. Owen came in and sat on the edge of the bed and took his grandmother's left hand in both of his, and he began to talk to her in a low voice, explaining what had happened, what he understood of it. And Gideon looked at the window and let the words wash past him without listening to their specifics. Some things are private even when witnessed, and he understood that his job in this moment was simply to be furniture. Coda lay down at Owen's feet. After a while, Owen looked over at Gideon. "I want to understand what he did," Owen said. He meant Ferris. "Your grandmother's lawyer can walk you through the legal pieces," Gideon said. "What I can tell you is that it has been stopped, and that it's in the hands of the right people now." "How did you know to come?" Owen asked. "A man named Russell," Gideon said. "He knew who to call." Owen looked at his grandmother's hand in his. "I need to request extended leave," he said, "to get the guardianship sorted out, to be here." "I can help with that if you need it," Gideon said. "Russell knows some people." Owen looked at him again, measuring something. "You're staying in Clearwater?" Gideon had not answered that question yet. He had not asked it of himself directly, which was perhaps the same as answering it. He looked at the window, at the thin winter light, at the mountains he could see above the roofline. "For a while," he said. Dorothy was watching him. He could feel it without looking. Vince's article ran in the Clearwater Chronicle 9 days later, after Irene confirmed it would not compromise the legal proceedings. The headline ran above the fold. Russell sent Gideon a photograph of it. Gideon looked at it for a moment, then set his phone face down on the table in the Meadow Fork Bakery and went back to his coffee. Arlene refilled his cup without being asked. The legal process moved the way legal processes do, which is to say, slowly and without drama, but with a direction. The contested agency designation held. The documentation produced by Ferris in response to Irene's subpoena contained 3 separate irregularities that Irene described, with some precision, as very helpful. The notarization by Deb Canner had been witnessed by only one person, not the required 2, and Deb Canner, when contacted by the state licensing board in connection with the complaint, said that she had been told by Ferris that the second witness requirement was waived for persons in medical care, which was not true, and that she had been uncomfortable with the signing and had not worked with Aldine Property Solutions since. She said all of this in writing and signed it, and Beverly Gaines's documents went to the AG's office. Harold Priest's records of the property transfers went to a county attorney who had been looking for a thread to pull on for some time. Dorothy came home to her house in early May, when the last of the snow had retreated to the mountains and the ground was soft, and the cottonwoods along the east side of the property had come back into leaf. Owen was there on leave, and Gideon helped him carry in the boxes, and Arlene brought food enough for a week because she said it was impractical to make anything for one person, and she had simply made more. The house was a 2-bedroom on a corner lot with a covered porch on the east side, and it smelled like the particular kind of emptiness that is not abandonment, but only waiting. Owen opened windows and the spring air came through. Dorothy sat in a chair on the porch and looked at the street and the greening yard with an expression that Gideon would not have been able to name precisely, because it was not one thing. It was the expression of a person who has returned to something she was not certain she would see again, and is taking the measure of what that means. Coda lay at her feet on the porch boards. There was a moment that afternoon when Owen had gone back inside, and Arlene was in the kitchen, and Gideon was sitting on the porch steps watching the street, when Dorothy said, without particular preamble, "You've been here 6 weeks." "Yes," Gideon said. "You have somewhere else to be?" He thought about the truck, the grime it had accumulated on the drive out here, which he had never gotten around to washing off. The loose spring in the driver's seat he had been meaning to fix. The map he kept in the glove compartment, with a dozen different towns circled in red ink, none of them this one. "Not specifically," he said. Dorothy said nothing for a moment. A sparrow landed on the porch railing, considered the dog, and departed. "There's a garage apartment," Dorothy said, "above the neighbor's detached garage. His name is Whitfield. He rented it out before, but it's been empty since last fall. I could call him." Gideon looked at his boots. He thought about his grandfather, who had moved for 3 years after the war and then stopped, and what stopping had cost him, and what it had given him. He thought about a river that clears itself by moving and goes still when it finds a reason. He thought about 6 weeks, and a dog that had chosen to rest beside an old woman on a winter afternoon, and a woman who had known, without being told, that he was someone who needed to be asked. "You could call him," Gideon said. Dorothy nodded once, as if that settled something that had needed settling for a while. The apartment above Whitfield's garage was small and smelled of old wood and motor oil and the particular kind of quiet that belongs to places that have been empty long enough to become patient. It had 2 windows that looked east toward the mountains, and a kitchen just large enough for the things that mattered. Gideon carried in his bags on a Saturday evening in late May, with the light coming in gold and horizontal through the east windows and Coda beside him on the stairs. He set his bags down and stood in the middle of the room and looked at it. He had stood in a lot of rooms in the past few years, assessing them the way you assess temporary shelter, calculating how long and what it would take to leave. He was surprised to find that he was not doing that now. He was just looking at the room. Coda walked to the east window and sat down and looked out. Gideon pulled the red circled map from his jacket pocket. He looked at it for a moment, and then he folded it in half, and then in half again, and set it on the kitchen counter. He would not throw it away. That was not who he was. He left it there, folded, while he went to find where things were kept. There are people in this world who are lost, not because they cannot navigate, but because they have not yet found a place that needed them to stop. Sometimes it takes a dying woman's hand on your sleeve, and a word spoken in pieces, slowly, carefully, across the distance of months of silence and loss. Sometimes it takes a dog who makes a choice before you do. Sometimes it takes the particular courage of letting someone else do the asking, so that you only have to answer yes. If you have been moving a long time, and you are tired in the way that sleep does not cure, let this story find you where you are. There are places that are waiting for the person who is willing to show up and stay. There are people who will be better for your presence, and you will be better for theirs, and the exchange is worth more than the open road. May God bless you and keep you wherever you are tonight. May He bring you rest that is more than rest, and may you find, when you need it most, someone who reaches toward you in the dark and says, simply, stay.